All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Veterans Learning Series, How to Ace the Interview. Here's Make America start up this workshop series to assist the broader military community with tips and tricks to help land that next civilian career. Whether you're currently transitioning out of the service or are already out, many of us may not have that experience with interviews and just it's a tough thing to master. And so we wanted to make sure that we went over some things to remember when going into that next interview. So welcome again. Let me also introduce myself. My name is Katie Bowerman. I'm a senior program manager with the Manufacturing Institute, and I oversee the Virtual Heroes Make America Military Skill Bridge Training Program, which we'll talk about in a minute. In addition to the variety of other events, virtual events like this workshop that we put on for our transitioning military, veterans, and military spouse community. So today we have guest speaker Vicki Morse from Caterpillar. I'm excited to have you all learn the knowledge that she brings from her years of experience in the industry. So before I get to her, let's go over a couple different guidelines. I briefly want to talk through, what's going on for today. So just so you know, this event is being recorded and will be sent out as part of a recap email. So for those who are not able to join us today, are still going to get the recording after. Or if you want to review it after the session, you'll be getting that recap email as well. So this is going to be an interactive session, but what I ask is that you stay on mute when you're not speaking as part of the discussion or asking questions. Just stay on mute so that we don't have that background noise. But Vicki does like an interactive session. I mean, this is all about practicing what we're talking about and what all the tips that she's bringing to the table. So I do encourage you to be an active participant. If you're not comfortable coming off of mute and asking those questions live, throw it in the chat box. So there is the chat box that you can throw any questions that you have in there, and I'll go ahead and read them off as we go through the slides. So definitely be an active participant. This is your time to learn and interact with someone who does these types of interviews regularly, right? So asking the expert about all the things that she knows and the advice that she has. So again, let's go over just a little bit about what Heroes Make America is. Our mission is to build connections between the military community and the manufacturing industry. So you can see here 4 main areas that our program focuses on. First of all, where it all started was our signature DoD-approved skill bridge training program. We have 5 different training programs across the country. 4 of them are in person, in which we train transitioning active duty service members and veterans in various skills that are needed by our industry. So I'll go over what those training tracks are on the next slide. Secondly, we have our almost weekly Heroes Connect Military to Manufacturing virtual events, where we bring in various companies for our military community to learn about who is hiring out there. What are these companies that I may never have heard of, and how my skills align to these different manufacturers. So if you didn't know this already, a lot of manufacturing companies are a great fit for our transitioning military because of the skills and experiences that you bring from the service. So we highlight our companies almost weekly. It's also just a great way for you to get out there and research different companies that are hiring today. Third, in 2013, we kicked off this new veteran learning series, which these events are open events to the broader military community, and we're highlighting topics that are designed to help you all as you're searching for your next future career. So lastly, this year, we also are kicking off different hiring events or different career events. So we have a quarterly virtual career fair that is specific to manufacturing. We had our first one in February. Our second one is going to be May 19th, which I'll throw up that slide in a few minutes with the different dates. We also are going to have our first in-person manufacturing specific career fair out at Fort Riley, Kansas. So if you are local to the area, I highly recommend June 8th is the in-person career fair. So lots of different ways for you to interact with the manufacturing industry and learn about the various companies that are hiring you and are looking for that military talent. So we're super busy here at Heroes Make America. So we're going to drop in a few links in the chat so you can connect with someone from our team. You can follow us on social media. You can look at the various events that we have planned and go ahead and register for the future events. So for our signature DoD-approved skill bridge program, you can see that we have 3 different certification training tracks that go towards the manufacturing and supply chain industry. So really our students learn a variety of topics to include things like safety, quality practices, technical trainings like electrical, mechanical, pneumatic training, and then we also have logistics training. It just depends on the site that our students are training with. So like I said, we have the 4 in-person and the 100% remote virtual training option. So you can see here our program managers and the certifications we offer and upcoming class dates. So we'll drop all of our contact information in, and you can connect with any one of us. If you ever have questions on any of our events, you can email that heroes@nam.org. That will get to someone and we'll get back to you with more information. So the upcoming events that we do have, I want to highlight the 3 that we have in April. We have a ton happening in May, but let's start with April. So we do have 2 Heroes Connects. We have one with Niagara Bottling. So they're a beverage bottling manufacturer. We also have an association partner, Plastics Pipe Institute. So they work with various piping manufacturing companies. So those are going to be April 5th and April 26th. Our next Veteran Learning Series like today is going to be on April 27th, which is going to focus on transitioning into your next career. And that's going to highlight John Buckley from Koch Industries, so another huge manufacturing conglomerate company. So some great events coming up. And then, like I promised, that virtual career fair out in May. So May 19th is going to be that one. So mark your calendar. Registration is coming soon for you to be able to get on that list to participate in that May 19th. So that's enough about Heroes Make America and me. So let's go ahead and move on to the main event. So without further ado, I want to introduce our guest speaker today. We have Vicki Morse. So Vicki works HR, early talent consultation, employee engagement for Caterpillar Inc. So you know Caterpillar Inc. You've seen their iconic yellow machinery on the side of the road, and they do a lot more than just that. But Vicki comes from Caterpillar and is here to impart all her wisdom on how to ace the interview. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to you, Vicki. We'll go ahead and get started.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Katie. Can everybody hear me? Perfect.
Yes,
well, now Katie set me up to be an expert and have a lot of wisdom, and I'm gonna take it down a notch. Like I know a little bit about a little bit, just enough to get me in trouble. So I am here to just give you any knowledge that I do have. The point of this series is very much to get you comfortable, give you some tips and tricks and some ways that you can feel like you are ready to win or ace the interview, right? So interviewing can be very anxiety ridden. It can cause people a lot of strife and cause a lot of anxiety. And the point of this is to really help you be as prepared as possible, and to be able to think of interviewing in a way that you can kind of, it takes some of that guessing and that anxiety and fear out of it. So I'm Vicki, like Katie said, and I currently work for Caterpillar Inc. in Wamego, Kansas. I say this is my dream job. Like literally when I went to school and did all the work, like when I thought about what I wanted to be doing, I'm in that role now. So that is lovely to say, and I love what I do, but really my favorite thing I do is I get to help people find the right career for themselves, right? So, and I get to assist with employee engagement inside my facility, as well as working with the veteran community, with schools, with tech schools, colleges, universities, and helping students and veterans and military spouses and just people in general find their way through the crazy job markets that we're currently in. So that being said, I do a lot of interviewing. I've been interviewing and in a leadership HR management position for about 22 years. So I have been through lots of interviews, and so I do have a lot of information to share, but this is a much more interactive, engaging presentation if you guys engage with me. So I know that it's being recorded and sometimes people don't want to necessarily talk. That's totally fine. If you guys could interact with me via the chat, Katie will keep us up to date on that. If you are willing to unmute and talk with me, I would really appreciate that. This is going to do a lot more for you if we have that interaction. So, and you never know, if we have some interaction and you shoot me your address, you might get a little swag bag in the mail. I am guilty of doing that a lot. So please, let's have some fun and let's get this done. So next slide. All right. So my biggest thing and Caterpillar's biggest thing is we are all about making sure everything we do is safe, right? So for this, I want to call out some psychological safety. I want this to be a very open and interactive presentation. I want to make sure that you guys feel safe in the learning that you're receiving. I also want to make sure that everybody feels safe in being able to, challenge me a little bit, or to ask questions, or to, kind of challenge that status quo. Of course, I'm going to feel safe with having the conversations I'm going to have with you. But we just want to make sure everybody feels included, feels safe to ask questions and to continue learning this message. And of course, that I feel safe giving it to you. Next. Awesome. So we're going to jump right into the meat and potatoes. So we're going to start with kind of how you like things you can do to kind of prepare yourself for an interview. So like I said, interviewing can be very anxiety ridden. It can cause a lot of different feelings, maybe make you feel uncomfortable, scared, things like that. So what we're going to do today is kind of talk about things that you can do before, during, and after an interview to kind of set yourself aside, set yourself up for success. Put yourself in a position where when you leave that interview, they're going to remember you in a positive way. And then ways that you can make yourself feel prepared. Every interview is different. You never know exactly what they're going to ask. And so you can't walk into it with all the answers to the question. But we can help you with finding some ways to kind of be able to be prepared. So I always tell people to start the interview, or before you go to the interview, make sure you've updated your resume, your work history is up to date. Not just for the company, but for yourself. I personally have been working since I was 14 years old. I am not going to put all of that on my work history by any means, but sometimes you forget something, or I worked there, but when did I work there? And, if you've kind of laid it out and you've updated that work history, you're able to speak to that a little bit easier also. So it doesn't cause you those like deer in a headlight moments where they ask you a question and you're like, when was that? Right. So, always come to the interview in business wear. I say that because there is a time where you come to an interview and you're interviewing to be a welder. I don't expect you to come in a 3-piece suit, right? Or in even a suit and tie or a dress shirt, right? Like you could come to a welder interview in jeans and a nice shirt and be fine. But if you're going to come in and apply for or interview for a position where you're going to be a store manager or a leader inside of a factory or someplace like that, then yes, you would want to come with like a button down shirt, maybe some slacks, things like that. So dress for the interview that you're applying for. I would say I wouldn't come in like, a torn up shirt for, a welder position, but you could wear a nice polo and a pair of jeans for a welder, right? So there's definitely dress for the business that you're going in for. Take some time to read that job description pretty carefully. So we're all guilty of this. You go through and you're looking for a new job and you apply for everything that seems like it may be something that's in your wheelhouse, right? Or that you would want to do. And then you may not have fully read the job description. You get a call back about a job interview, and then you walk into the interview and it's not the job that you expected it to be. So when you have time, or when you get called for the interview, make sure you've fully read that job description and you know what you're walking into. It's going to help with that anxiety. It's going to help you also prepare a little bit more with your mindset of like, this is my job description, or these are my previous work history, right? This is what the job I'm going into. How does what I have done relate to what I'm going to be going into an interview for, right? And it helps you to kind of formalize those statements and that mindset, right? So then I always tell people to familiarize yourself with the location. I try to arrive 10 minutes early for anything I do. I do come from a military background where my dad always said, if you're on time, you're late. And if you're late, or if you're early, you're on time. And if you're on time, you're late. Right. So I always strive to be early. it helps with making sure you're where you need to be. So let's say you're walking into an office building, you're there, your interview's at 10 o'clock in the morning, you get there at 9:50, you walk in and you find out you have to be up 3 flights of stairs and down on the other end of a hallway. You have 10 minutes to get there. But if you walk in at 9:57 and you find out that you have to be up 3 flights of stairs and on the other end of a hallway, you're going to be late. Right. So give yourself a little bit of cushion to get where you need to be. It helps with that anxiety again. If you're running to get there on time, or you're going to be a few minutes late because you have to go up the elevator and down 2 hallways to get to where you're going, your body will automatically start to have that anxiety. So anytime you can mitigate any of those issues prior to walking into that room with the interview, that also helps. Tanya Green, I will talk about virtual interviews. So give me just a second. Take a few minutes before the interview and just kind of transition. So like I said, getting there a few minutes early and then taking those few minutes to just to transition into that mindset of interviewing. We all have lives outside of an interview or a job, right? So if you go into this thinking like, hey, my kid's at this appointment, he needs to be at this appointment, needs to be picked up, my husband needs to do this, right? Or my wife needs to do that. And you go right into an interview, though, those things are in your mind, right? But if you just take a few minutes prior to walking in that door and just kind of pump yourself up, think about, the ways that you are going to find success, that you have found success. Maybe, remind yourself, this is the job at, Caterpillar I've been looking at. This is this job is right for me because X, Y, and Z. And you just transition your mindset into the interview site, then the job mindset. It helps with, again, that anxiety of all the other things are kind of pushed to the side and you're very focused. Rehearse telling success stories. I do this every day on my way to work, guys. It's awful how many times we put ourselves down, right? We'll do something, you're like, oh, I can't believe you did that. That's such a dumb move, right? Or I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I did that, right? Or we negatively impact our thoughts about something we've done, something we've said, something, we've whatever. So when we rehearse telling success stories to ourselves, it reminds ourselves that we are great and we are worthy and we have a reason and a purpose, right? So I tell myself success stories on a regular basis, just to kind of keep my mindset a very positive mindset, especially before an interview. Remind yourself of why they called you, right? So they may have had 50 people that applied for that position and they picked 5 to call back, or they picked 25 to call back, right? But either way, you got a call back and you're walking into this interview and there's a reason for it. So what is that reason? Like, what success have you had that makes them want to talk with you? Because if you're getting to that interview process, there's a reason, right? So they're choosing you to begin with. So how can you continue to make them choose you, right? So reminding yourselves of those success stories, ways you've found success in your career, in your personal life, will always help with that. And then, of course, updating your voicemail message and ensuring there's the availability to leave a message. This is really important, right? So from the moment you apply for a job, if you don't answer that phone call, the first instinct or the first interaction they technically have with you is with your voicemail. So if your voicemail is completely full, or your voicemail says something in a negative way, your voicemail is one of those like jokester, hi, nope, you got my voicemail, it can all set a tone for you. So I would tell people, before you interview, before you even apply, when you start applying for jobs, make that voicemail as professional as possible, even if it's just, hi, you reached Vicki. Sorry, I couldn't get to the phone. Leave me a message and I'll get back with you at my earliest convenience. That is more professional than a jokester voicemail. Not that that's going to, take you out of the running. But all of those things can make an impression on you, right? or for you. And then, of course, go over any information received by a recruiter. So, usually, when you get a call back, like at least for us at Caterpillar, we use what's called the STAR technique, and we'll go over that here in a little bit. But we are very behavioral based. Most interviews nowadays are. We've kind of transitioned to this behavioral based interview across most types of positions. That being said, a recruiter will send that information out to you. Hey, this is the type of interview that we do. Here's the type of technique we use. And they give you kind of some information about that. A lot of times they'll send you additional information on benefits up front. They may send you information on where you're going, how to get there, who to ask for, whatever. So make sure you've taken time to look over that information that you've received from a recruiter prior to the interview so you are prepared as possible. Going back to the question that Tanya had, if you have a virtual interview, I would say do the same thing. Today, I got on here probably even earlier than the 15 minutes that I scheduled to, do some like tech, making sure like that my tech's working and all that stuff. But give yourself that time frame. If you're running to your computer 3 minutes before a virtual interview, they see that, right? So you sit down and you're trying to arrange yourself or fix something, or you find out your computer's not working 3 minutes before an interview. That all sets you up for either success or can potentially failure, right? So give yourself time to make sure that the link that they sent you for the virtual email is working. Give yourself time to make sure that your speaker's working, or your volume's working, or that even your camera is working, right? So we do a lot of virtual interviews. I tell people to prepare for themselves, or prepare themselves for a virtual interview the same way that they prepare for an in-person, right? So if you usually do your hair, dress nice, wear makeup, or shave, or whatever the case may be, man, woman, whatever, do the same thing. Just because it's virtual, it's just as important, right? So we, since the pandemic, have found that you can do a lot of things virtually. It's just as important as if you're in person. So I recommend still preparing the same way, giving yourself that extra time, being able to check for tech, that your technology is working is extremely important when you're on a virtual. Did that answer your question, Tanya? Maybe? Okay, perfect. Is there any other questions before I go on to the next slide?
I don't see any in the chat box, but I'll let you know if any pop up.
Perfect. All right. So next slide. Okay, so during the interview, there's a couple things we can do. Obviously, be aware of your body language. So and you guys, I'm sure you have seen it. I speak with my hands. I have a tendency of like playing with my hair. I click pens. That's just the type of like personality I have, right? So I have to be mindful of that when I go into an interview. A lot of times your body language can say something about you that you don't necessarily want to say or mean to say, right? So if you're sitting like this, very closed off, that comes across to that interviewer as closed off, or maybe either you're hiding something or you're disinterested, right? So just think about what that body language is saying about you. If you're sitting more open or up, your eye contact is there, you're smiling, any of those things can make the interviewer think that you are engaged, you're interested. That can put a different type of spin on your interview. So be aware of your body language. Make sure you give structured and to the point answers. We say this because the more to the point you can be, it's usually easier for them to understand and then ask additional questions if they need additional clarification. We use a very structured type of interview. Again, we'll go over that. But most places do use some type of, maybe not the STAR technique, but some type of technique to be able to, you know, give a pointed and structured answer. So making sure that you know, adhere to those is always important. Speak clearly and slowly. Even myself in this presentation, I forget that, or I get anxious to begin with, right? So I talked probably quicker and not as clearly in the beginning of this presentation just because of my nerves, right? So as this presentation goes on, you'll see me start to calm down a little bit. I'll speak more clearly. I'll slow down in the way I talk. My movements will be a little different, especially by the time I get to this slide, because it kind of reminds me about it. But in general, we are all guilty of, you know, talking fast or sometimes even mumbling when we are nervous, or sometimes scared or anxious, right? So being aware of that and making a point to focus on the clarity and the sound and the speed that you're talking can help. I always tell people, don't be afraid to ask for clarification. I'm going to say something now that you are going to hear me say probably 100 times for the rest of this this presentation. Interviews are just as much about you finding the right fit as it is for the company finding the right fit. And I truly believe that as a company, when on average, a company spends anywhere from $12,000 to $25,000 to onboard a new employee. And that's including like even a cashier at a local grocery store, right? By the time you pay for the people's payroll that interviewed them, to training them, to paying for any additional uniforms or for us PPE, things like that, right? Anywhere in the process, you can definitely spend anywhere on average $12,000 to $25,000, right? So we don't want to, no company wants to just waste money, right? We want to find the right person for us, but we also want to make sure that we're the right fit for them, right? So if you are in an interview and you don't ask questions that are important to you, then at the end of the day, you find out 6 months into it or 2 months into it, you hate what you're doing and it's not what you wanted to do or what you expected, and you leave. That company has lost that money. And if you had asked a question, if they had given you some insight during the interview that would have spawned that, you know, spark in your mind that maybe this isn't the right fit, then we both could have gone a different way and maybe the right candidate was the next person, right? Like in line, right? So ask questions, ask for clarification when you're in an interview. Those are really important for yourself and for the people that are interviewing you. So any questions about what we've just kind of talked about, what you can do during the interview that can kind of set yourself apart or to set yourself up for success? No? Well, if there's no questions, we can go to the next slide.
Vicki, I actually have one. Stephen, if you want to come on and ask your question.
Yeah. So what if you, during the interview, you start feeling yourself lose it? How do you bring yourself back to center?
Yeah. So when you say lose it, do you mean like you're getting sidetracked or maybe you're not sure how to answer the question that they just gave you and you
All the above.
Okay, perfect. So that's okay. I have been in the middle of an answer of, and this is a true story. I have been in the middle of an answer for an interview and totally lost my train of thought. And you have to like, you're like, crap, I was going somewhere with this, right? But I don't even know where it was. And I've just kind of taken a second and thought for just a second. And then that said, you know what? I'm not sure that I'm even answering your question. So let me start over, right? And then it gave me the ability to restart my train of thought, right? So if you are in the middle of an answer and you just lose it, right? It's okay to take a step back and think, I think I was thinking about that answer or the question in a different way. Let me start from scratch. Here's the question you asked me. Here's the answer I'm going to give you, right? So just to recap, so I feel like I maybe have gotten off track. I'm not sure the answer I was giving you was for the question you asked me. The question you wanted to know was how I have been able to lead a team through a hard time or a hard transition. And I think that the best answer for that is I take a step back. I look at the way I interact with my team, how I've built my rapport, the things that we've been successful at. And I take those items and I take the way I've done that. And in turn, I coach that way. I make the transition in this direction. I focus my power or I focus my direction in this, right? So that was an example of a way you could kind of recap your answer, right? So if you find that you're down a road that you cannot get back, it's okay to take a step back and say, hey, I don't think I was on the right path here. Let me start over. I'm going to listen to that as an interviewer in a lot better way. We are all human. And no matter how many interviews that you've done or been involved in, we're human. We make mistakes. We answer the wrong question. We think of things in a different way. So it's okay if you lose track or you're answering incorrectly, or you think, man, this isn't the way I want to answer this, to take that step back and say, hey, let me start over. That's acceptable. Did that answer your question, Stephen?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for asking that, Stephen. Vicki, we have another question from Tanya. So Tanya, if you want to unmute. Try again speaking, Tanya. Maybe it'll work now. Oh, maybe her mic isn't working. Tanya, if you want to throw your question in the chat box, I can read it off. Any other questions while Tanya types out her question? All right, Vicki, we'll have to come back to Tanya once she gets her question in there.
No problem. All right. So,
oh, I found it. Is there any time where we should end the interview if we feel it isn't going well?
So if I would not end an interview. If you are interviewing and you feel like it's not going in the direction you want it to do, even if an interviewer rolls their eyes, because first off, they need to check their face. So as an interviewer, they should be they should be very open to whatever you're saying, right? So if you feel like the interview is not going in the direction you want it to go, start to steer it in the way you want it to go. Now, if you feel like, hey, I'm interviewing for something, the more information they give me about that position, it may not necessarily be what I'm interested in, right? I would recommend to continue the interview because you never know, maybe that's not the right fit for you, but years down the line or weeks down the line, a position opens up that would be a better fit for you or you would be more interested in. And because you finished the interview with them, you continue to answer their questions and you were upfront, they may consider you for that other role. So I recommend not ending an interview. I have been in rooms where people have, like, we would talk about background checks and drug screenings and things like that, and people have just stopped and walked away and said, hey, thanks for your time. And that's unfortunate, because just because somebody has made a mistake or something in their previous life or earlier in their career does not necessarily mean that that's going to disqualify them. So I personally would not end an interview. but that's a great question. And truly, whoever you're interviewing with, if they feel like it's not the right fit, if they feel like the interview is not going well, they have the means of ending that interview in a little quicker manner. Potentially not asking as many questions. But for you, I would consider, just continuing on. And if you feel like maybe it's not going in the right direction, start to steer it in that right direction.
Great question, Tanya. I bet other people have been in that situation and didn't know what to do. So
Yes.
thank you for that advice, Vicki. Do we have any other questions? I saw a couple of you unmute. Just want to make sure I provide that opportunity. They may have gotten shy. If you have a question, throw it in the chat. We will circle back to it. Do you want me to switch to the next slide, Vicki?
Yep, that'd be great. All right. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about behavioral based interviews. So we at Caterpillar use what's called STAR. So it's basically the situation or the task, and then the action that you did to resolve the issue, and then the results that you received. So that being said, this is one technique. There are a lot of them that are situational based. So they all kind of fall into the same type of answer, right? So they want to kind of know what was the issue that you needed to resolve, what actions you took, and then the results that you received. The reason we've moved more to this behavioral base, right, is we get a lot of information. It also allows us to see you through a different light. So it's very direct. It gives us very meaningful and pointed answers. But sometimes the way that the way your actions the actions you took come through, it allows us to see maybe this person sees the big picture. This person has the ability to multitask. So sometimes your answers will give more information about you than necessarily you realize. So when you're thinking about doing a behavioral based interview, the best thing I can do is tell you there's a reason you're in that interview room, right? So your resume made some sort of impression on them. So let's take that step. And what was it in your resume that you bragged about? Or what was it that you said, hey, I was able to do X at my previous job, right? So maybe you're interviewing for a sales manager role. And on your resume, it states that you were the number one store in the company in this month, and you did X amount of dollars, right? So that's a success story that you put into your resume. How did you get to that? And then use that success story and work your way back. So the results were we were the number one store in the company and we did X amount of dollars. And how did we get there? What actions did I take? So then work yourself back from that R to the A. The actions I took were I personally worked going into that month. I knew it was going to be busy. It's back to school month. I sat down with all of my leaders and I said, hey, this is what we need to do. In order to win, we're going to win in these different markets or this different areas. And we're going to take those areas by storm. And the way we're going to do that is that you're going to focus on this area. You're going to make sure everything's set up correctly, that we're fully stocked, that our team knows the new products that are coming out, whatever the case may be. And so you made these action items, right? You talked with your team, you set these plans up, right? And then from the A, you go to the T and the S. And then basically you say, hey, the S and the T the situation was, it is back to school. We know we're going to be super busy and we've got a couple launches of some new products. How can we take these new products and the increased traffic, right, that we've had or we're going to have and really own that series? And then you've got your star from the result that you bragged about to the situation and the task. You've worked your way and you've found the answer. No matter what question they ask you in the interview, at some point, you're going to be able to use that star or that answer in that pointed way to give them that, right? So I tell people to rehearse your success stories because those are the answers to the quiz, right? That's the answers to the test. You've got all the answers. Any question they ask you, unless it's some like theoretical, like if you were an type of fruit, what would you be? Which you can prepare for that too. You've got those answers, right? So you have been successful in your career for a reason. How can you get that information out in an interview? Is there any questions about kind of the STAR technique or behavioral based techniques that we're going to talk a little bit more about?
Vicki, there is one. Does the company tell the candidates that they are doing a behavioral based interview prior to the interview?
Oof. I think can you guys hear me? Because I just lost Katie talking.
I can hear you, Vicki. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Okay. So yes, you're kind of glitchy, but I read the chat, so I know what you said. So a company should prepare you for a behavioral based interview. Most companies will do this via, like when they are scheduling the interview, they will tell you that it's a behavioral based, or they'll send you a follow-up email that says, hey, like this screen that you're looking at right now comes directly from what we send out when we schedule an interview here at Caterpillar. So when we schedule an interview, we send this exact sheet, like this piece is on a paper that we send out. So it shows them like, this is what you will be doing in your interview type. So most companies that have a behavioral based will let you know. Sometimes they will not, but when you get in to do the interview, they will let you know it's a behavioral base. They may not have a STAR technique or whatever, but basically what they're wanting you to do is give them an answer in a behavioral based, story type answer. Did you guys get all that?
We did. And Vicki, in case, I don't know if I'm coming in glitchy again, but I threw my question in the chat directly to you. But can you talk through maybe different types or levels of interviews? Because I think sometimes that throws off folks, like a screening interview with the HR talent acquisition versus your first interview with a hiring manager. Can you talk through maybe some differences on those?
Yeah. So the first interview technically that you're going to go through is usually a screening interview. So what they'll do is somebody will contact you based off of the email that you or the application you submitted. That can be contacting you through email. It can be contacting you through a phone call, sometimes even text messaging. The world we live in now, technology is making things a lot easier, right? So sometimes they'll send you a text and say, hey, we got your application, interested in chatting with you. Do you have some time, right? So when they set that first interaction out with you, that is still technically an interview. It's just a very it's very, it's the very infant stages, right? So they're going to do a pre-interview with you. They're going to get some basic information and see if you kind of hit the check marks, right? So every job requires some basic qualities. So they're going to say, hey, this person, they hit all the check marks on the thing or on the checklist. So now we'll go ahead and we'll move them into the interview stage. So that can look a couple different ways. I am HR. I may not do me personally, I may not be doing the pre-screenings. I have recruiting and recruiters and things like that will do those pre-screenings, right? But then you may hit HR or the hiring manager for your first either virtual or in-person interview. And that's when they officially call it an interview. Most of the time for an entry level or even like a support or management position, you're gonna speak to an HR person or the hiring manager. If you're going into a higher, like a tier 2 or 3 leadership position, you may have 3 or 4 interviews, right? So it all just kind of depends on what kind of role you're going into. But you will see a pre-screening most of the time, which is kind of just the check marks. And then they will push you on into the interview. Did that answer the question you wanted me to talk about, Katie?
Thank you for elaborating on that. I have another question in the chat.
Yeah.
Regarding, do organizations train their employees on how to conduct those interviews?
Yeah. So I had to go, I have been interviewing for 22 years or more. And when I came to Caterpillar, I had to go through like a 2-hour training session, as well as like sit through like 5 interviews before I was allowed to interview for Caterpillar. Right. So, yes, organizations usually will train their interviewers to how to interview. Right. So there are some questions like we cannot ask. And so if we've never been through any kind of training, we would not know that, right? So there are most organizations will train their interviewers to interview in a way that is necessary for that job, right? So I had to learn the STAR technique through Caterpillar's mindset. And then they even teach us like questions, like, and even our guides will have additional questions that we can ask to make sure that we're helping people get their star, right? So at the end of every when we get an answer from somebody, right, as an interviewer, we have to make sure that we've gotten the full star, right? So we know the situation, the action, and the result, right? So if I get an answer and I know the situation, I know the result, but I don't know the action that they took, there's even questions that will allow me, it'll tell me additional questions I can ask to help pull that action out of you, or maybe the result out, or and so I will ask additional questions, right? So that's a good thing. We want you to be successful. We also want to know, right? That's great. You had the results and we know what the situation was, but what actions were taken, right? Those actions are really what are going to give us more information. I will tell anybody who like listens, you don't have to have a good result. Like sometimes your results are going to be bad, guys. Like, so nothing is perfect. Like you cannot be 100% of the time, right? So it's okay if the result was like we failed miserably, but then how did you come back from that? Like, great, so you failed, but how do you, like, so where do you go from now? Or like where do you go next? And then that answer will give us more, that gives us more information about you and you being able to work through something, than finding out that everything you do is gold, right? So I would rather have the, hey, I screwed up royally and this is how I came back from it answer every single time, because it allows me to have more insight on you. So don't worry about the result as much as the actions you took. And then if the result wasn't good, what actions did you take to get the right results that you wanted? Does that make sense? Did I answer the question?
That definitely makes sense. And I think that's important for them to know that it's okay to talk about failure. Failure means growth. So thank you for mentioning that. I do have another question, because you had mentioned there are things that you are not allowed to ask. And so I think we often get this question is, what are they not allowed to ask me on? So they know to prepare, just to have that idea of, things that shouldn't be asked in general. Can you touch on those types of things that should not be asked?
Yes, you kind of cut out, but I think the gist of what are the items that we are not allowed to ask, right? So as a whole, we cannot ask questions about like protected classes, right? So we can't ask you, truthfully, we can't ask you about your children. We can't ask you if you like any kind of race, sex, any origin, any of that. We can't ask any questions based around those. If somebody talks about being pregnant, we can't really elaborate more on that. Like you can state anything you want to state, but we have to stay away from those protected classes. So we cannot ask additional follow-ups, right? So let's just say, for example, true story, I have a child that's 1.5 years old. When I was pregnant, I was upfront and honest, like, hey, I am pregnant. I am due around this time, because I want people to know, before that's just how I am. Right. So, that's fine. And I can release that information, but they cannot ask that information. Does that kind of clear it up? So anything that's what could be considered a protected class, we can't ask that type of question. We can't ask a question that is, potentially going to lead you to self-disclose information, right? So if you have not, right, I cannot ask you about your veteran disability rating. Like, that is not allowed. That is none of my business, truthfully. Now, if you are trying to get a position with me that requires you to lift more than 50 pounds, or requires you to do X, Y, and Z, and you like those are required statement, like that is in the job description, as must be allowed to, or must be able to do X, Y, and Z. I can ask you if you are able to, if you've read the job description, and if you are able to adhere to these like specific things. Can you bend, kneel, swoop, pick up 50 pounds or more, walk, 10 miles a day, stand on your feet for up to 8 hours? Like, those are requirements of the job, and I can ask those, right? But I cannot ask you if you tell me, unfortunately, I'm not able to do that, right? Because I got hurt in the military and I cannot stand for more than 2 hours at a time. Then I may ask an additional question, like, so if you aren't able to stand for more than 2 hours at a time, after 2 hours, what is the requirement? Like, are you able to sit for 30 minutes and then be on your feet again? That question is more for, am I able to make a realistic accommodation for this person, right? If I can, then I can continue this interview. If I cannot make a realistic, if you say nope, I can only stand for 2 hours all day long, and I am hiring for a position that requires you to be on your feet for a long period of time, there's no accommodation I can make that can, supplement 6 hours of standing, then that's a conversation we need to have, right? But I cannot ask you about your veteran disability rating or anything like that. Did that answer your question?
Yes, I think that does answer the question. There's another one in the chat regarding if they are interviewing for an HR role, does it look bad or is it a strike against them if they don't answer perfectly with the STAR method perfectly?
No. So even when you're interviewing for an HR role, so this is funny. I actually they redid my position about 4 months ago. They restructured it, and I had to re-interview for the position I'm already in, right? So I had to interview with my boss, 2 coworkers, and a facility manager who I work with every day, and I have a very great relationship with, right? I messed up, guys. I teach these classes. I do all these things, right? And they asked me a question and I did not answer in a STAR format. And and I knew it. I answered them and then I laughed. And I was like, that wasn't even in a STAR format. Let me start over, right? So even me, who Katie calls me an expert, which I made sure everybody knew I was not, but even me, I make mistakes, right? So no, it's not going to be held against you. The biggest thing that I can tell you is to make every effort to give them a behavioral based answer. So here's what I was working with, here's what I did, and here was the results. If you give them the results and then tell them how you got the results, it's okay, right? So you didn't go in the star format, right? That's okay. And they're good. And truly, if they're good at what they're doing, they're going to ask you follow-up questions. But no, it is not going to discount you or throw you to the wayside because you did not answer it. And if that's how they are interviewing, it's probably not the right fit.
I think that is great advice. We do have another question, and I can see where this is coming from because some of our military have confidential roles, right? They can't divulge certain information. So what happens if they're missing important details due to confidentiality? Does it come off as aloof or that you're confused? Or what advice do you give for someone who can't give all the details?
That's okay. So here's what I'll tell you. If you are in a role that is how do I say this? Okay. If you have a example that you want to use, but you cannot give all of the actions or the results or whatever, I'm not going to know, right? You can tell me that you could tell me anything in an interview, and I'm not going to know the difference unless you're interviewing with me and I know previous information about this situation or speaking about. I don't know. So you can answer the question in a way that you are given action items that maybe are not exactly what happened, but they are a representation of what happened, right? So if you were on a classified mission and you can't say exactly what you did, if the information is that classified that you can't give them any kind of potential examples of the action and examples of a result, I would not use the example. That being said, if you are trying to get a point across, you should be able to think of an example of an action and an example of a result and an example of a situation that maybe are not exactly what happened, but they are representative of what took place. Not lying, but not necessarily giving classified information, if that makes sense. Did that answer the question?
I think it did. I'll let the individual respond. Perfect. Yeah, he said yes, it did. Thank you. I have received that question as well. So that's a great question because some of our military just don't know how to go around that confidentiality. So great advice. Those are all the questions that we have in the chat right now. Do we want to move on to the next slide and then we'll come back to questions?
Absolutely. Perfect. So here's an example of a question that could be asked, and then a very easy and pointed answer that goes into the STAR technique. So basically, describe a situation where you had to lead a team through a process that was not a change in process that was not widely accepted. So for example, the situation is we had to switch systems for delivery. Our previous system was very easy to use, but did not have enhanced functionality. The more tenured employees needed to have some additional training, right? So the activity was I set up training sessions and allowed employees access to a new system in kind of a training mode for about 2 weeks prior to going live. It basically allowed them to get a feel for the new program and process and gain a comfort level. Little did I realize it was going to allow us to catch some issues in the software program. Ultimately, the result The staff felt very confident in the process change. And when the system went live, it was very smooth transition for our employees, but also for our customers, because we did catch some glitches prior to going live. That question, right? And it can kind of go back to that last question that was just asked. So that answer, I said question, that answer could very easily be used for somebody who maybe was in a more classified like type of role, right? I didn't go into detail about the program. I didn't go into detail about specifics, right? But I was able to give a very generic, we had to change systems for deliveries. We needed to make sure people knew what they were doing. We did X, Y, and Z. This is the result we received, right? So you can be very generic while still answering the question very pointed. Any questions about kind of the sample question that I just laid out here? Or is anybody willing to kind of take a stab at it, right? So has anybody had to lead a team through a change? And then, they want to tell me what that situation or task was, maybe the activity they took and the result they received.
If you would like to take a stab at it and practice your star answer, this will be your time. If you want to raise your hand or just come on live, I'll give it a few seconds to see if we have any volunteers. And if you're not able to come off of mute, which I know some of us are not in this space to be able to do that, if you wanted to type it out, you can maybe just do a shorter version, but you could type that out and we can read through it as well. Do I have any brave souls out there who would like to take a stab at answering a STAR question?
And here's what I'll tell you. I know this is kind of a different situation, right? And so even offline, you guys, I think they've linked my in my LinkedIn as well as my email to this, and I put it on my slides. But if you have questions prior to an interview that you are interested in like, hey, how could I prepare for this? Or here's some of the things I've done that I'm really proud of, and this is kind of how I got to them. Would this be an acceptable answer? Like, we can always chat offline with that also. So you guys have access to me in a couple different ways. If this is not the right setting, that's totally fine. Please feel free to reach out anytime you have any questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. Please give me a little bit of grace. I am pretty busy. So if I don't get back to you right away, it's not because I'm ignoring you or it's not important. It may take me a day or two to get back to you. Even Katie, I've left her hanging for a day or two. So I try really hard to get back to you same day, but sometimes it just does not happen.
I appreciate you providing that platform for them to be able to ask questions. We did drop it in the chat, her contact information again. Kathleen, I see that you unmuted. Did you want to ask a question? Okay.
No, I was just going to respond to your sample question if that was okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so if the sample question is still the same, then the situation for myself is that we implemented a new process at my unit that required additional input prior to going live. And so the task was, we switched the system, basically the same sort of thing. The task was that we, the old process to how we quote unquote used to do things all the time wasn't going to be logistically possible for the new process. So all of the input personnel needed to get a little bit of, not only did they need to get access to the system, but then they needed to get training as well. So I set up trainings. I went through, I did the process myself. I created a how-to slideshow, and then I put it out multiple times and got everybody on the same page. And we were able to implement that process with fewer issues than would have been without the process training.
That was perfect. So let me tell you a little bit about what you just did. So you talked about what you did and then also what as a team you guys did. So that's big, right? So especially when you're going into a position where you're wanting to be a leader. We have this conversation a couple weeks ago at one of these I was doing. So they hear so often you hear talk about what we did as a group if you're going to be a leader. And yes, that's important, right? So as a leader, you want to know that you like when you're interviewing, we want to know that you led, right? So we as leaders we talk about how it's a team atmosphere, right? So we want to know when you're interviewing or when you're talking about your team, you should talk about your team, not just you. That is extremely important, right? But you made a PowerPoint and you taught those leaders, right, how to do that so that as a team, you could be successful. So when you're in an interview, make sure you speak about what you did as well as how that impacted what your team did and how that got the result you're looking for. So that was perfect.
I agree. I thought that was a great example. Vicki, I don't know if you see Tanya's in the chat. Would you like me to read it off?
Let me pull it up. Let's see what I got. Our ship needed help passing a major inspection, so we chose to come out of my division to lead a maintenance team of ship. Sorry, I talk as I read. Sorry. Let's lead this effort. That's perfect. So I love the fact that you talked about, again, what you did as a leader, right? So you came and you did these things, but we worked very hard and you guys as a team were able to pull out the result that we needed. So that's the perfect one, Tanya. Again, I cannot, you typed very fine, very perfect. It was great. But the biggest thing I can tell you as leaders, we need to make sure that we do speak about how we fixed as a team came to we're able to get the result. But what you as their leader did to get them ready for that result. So both of what you guys, but what both of you ladies had talked about just now, you did a really great job of saying what you did and then how the department was able to get where they needed to do.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, and I saw some others unmute. Tony, I don't know if you had a question. I saw you unmute for a second. If not, it's okay. All right, and I guess just quickly for the recording, since the recording cannot see the chat, I'm going to read off Tanya's example that Vicki just went over. So what Tanya had written was, our ship needed help passing a major inspection. So they chose me to come out of my division to lead a maintenance team of shipboard personnel to lead this effort. So we worked very hard and took the lead of a division that was in danger of failing. So we ended up preventing them from failing. The ship passed that inspection and we deployed on time and kept other ships from having to deploy earlier on shorter notice. So that is the example that Vicki just referred to. So those who are not able to see the chat, that is what was just discussed. So I don't see any other examples in the chat. We can always circle back. So we can go to the next slide and then we'll have some Q&A at the end.
Perfect. All right. So as the interview wraps up, right? So we're getting to that end point, right? I always recommend that you have a couple questions prepared and save at least one for the end. So me personally, throughout the interview process, I ask my interviewee, do you have any questions, right? So they'll answer. We may have a little bit of conversation and then I'll say, do you have any other questions before we move to the next question? It's okay to ask questions during that time frame. I would hold your questions that are important to you until they give you the green light at the end of the interview to kind of ask any additional questions, right? So when I say have questions prepared, you're going to hear me say it again, and I'll say it again and again and again. This interview is just as much for you as it is for the company, right? So, what is important to you, right? So, for me, I have a 1.5-year-old. I have a couple grandbabies. I have a husband. I have a Harley I like to ride. Like, my personal life is my personal life, right? And I love what I do and I love the industry I'm in, and I will go above and beyond to help anybody I can. But when I'm home and I'm with my babies and I'm with my babies, I want to be there. And that's important for me, right? So when I go into an interview, my biggest questions are, what are the benefits, right? What are my benefits for my family, right? So health insurance, 401k, paid time off, like those things, right? But also, what does a typical day look like, right? So if a day for the job I'm interviewing for is from 6 a.m. until 7 at night, and it's go, 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 go 6 days a week, that's not necessarily going to work into the work-life balance that I want, right? And that's important for me. If I don't have those extra things in my life and I just want to, like, I'm down for working all day long, and they say 6 a.m. to 7 at night, 6 days a week is what we need, that may work for some people, right? So asking those questions, what's a typical day? What's a work-life balance look like, right? Ask the questions that are important for you. If you are retired military and you have your pension, you have a disability rating, maybe you're on your TRICARE, like, benefits may not be a priority for you, but you want to know that you get 3 weeks off because you like to go to Sturgis every year, right? Like, that being said, talk with them about whatever those questions are, right? So this is just as much for you as it is for them. So have some questions prepared at the end that will point you to whether or not this is the right fit for you, right? Every question they've asked is whether you're going to be the right fit for them. This is your time to interview them. Are they the right fit for you? If you have anything that you need to clarify, this is the time to do it. Hey, we touched on this. You told me that the position was X. Can you clarify a little bit more about whatever the case may be, right? So this is a great time for you to interview, or for you to get anything clarified that you need to clarify. And then, of course, if everything else is done and you've got all the clarification you need, you've asked your questions, they answered them, you feel like you're ready to go, then thank them for the time. And if it is something you're interested in, what does that next step look like, right? So if you have asked them questions, like, let's use HR, for example. HR is a lot of different things. For me, human resources is engaging my employees. It's engaging early talent. It's talking with, being that, not necessarily a recruiter, but being a liaison from my company to a potential employee, right? At whatever level that looks like, right? It is not talking about health insurance or leave of absences and things like that. Now, that is HR also. So if what I want to be doing is being an HR generalist, and I want to be able to talk with people about their benefits, leave of absence, answer any issues potentially, about any human resources, or like potential issues they've had with a supervisor or another employee. Like, if that's the role I want to be in, and they're looking for somebody who's going to be more in the recruiting stage, then maybe I don't go to the next step, right? So maybe I say, hey, I really appreciate you and your time. Let me know if you have any additional questions or whatever the case may be, and leave it at that. But if I'm like, hey, this is right up my alley and this is what I want to do, then I ask them, right? So for next steps, like, so what does it look like next? Like, what can I prepare for in order to move to the next stage in the hiring process? That gives them the ability to kind of look at things a little differently. And sometimes my questions are like, to a hiring manager, what are you looking for in this role? If I'm really wanting this position and I say to a hiring manager, like, hey, what are you looking for? What personality traits, what characteristics are you looking for when you're hiring for this role? And they come back and they say, I'm looking for somebody with integrity, that's a self-starter, that's able to work very independently, and be a promoter for the company. Then I have the things that they're looking for. And in that thanking them for their time, hey, I really appreciate you taking your time with me. You stated that you want somebody who's a self-starter, that works independently but can be a champion for this company, and I think that's me, right? I can work independently, but I love working as a team. I will be your biggest champion for the company. I love going out and doing presentations to students. I love being involved in my community, and I would love to have that caterpillar across my chest to be that liaison for you guys, right? So by asking pointed questions to them, it also will allow you to, put yourself back into that role at the end when you're thanking them, right? So thanks so much for your time. This is why I think I'm the best fit. So what's the next step look like, right? And then that gives them the ability to talk with you a little bit more about what those next steps is. And they also will understand that you are very much still interested in that role. Any questions about how to wrap up that interview?
Don't see any in the chat. Oh, there's someone. Stephen, do you have another question? Or do you want?
Is it okay to ask about onboarding?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So again, if you're interested in the role and you can see yourself in that position, talking about what those next steps look like, what does onboarding look like, what's the process, how quickly are you looking to fill this position? Those are all great questions, right? It all signifies that you see yourself in the role that they're interviewing you for. What you can do to take it the next step is you can also say why you feel like you're a right fit. Like I said, being able to find out what they're looking for and then put yourself into those and kind of reevaluate, plug yourself into those roles that they're looking for. It takes it to that next level. But absolutely, when somebody asks me like, hey, what's that next step look like? What does the onboard process look like? Is there room for growth? Like all of those questions, again, show the person interviewing that not only are you interested, but you're looking to stay for a while.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for asking that, Stephen. I do have another question in the chat. What types of questions should we avoid?
I don't know that there's anything necessarily to avoid. I keep everything very positive, right? So I would say I would avoid stuff that could be construed as potentially like a protected class or something like that. But I would say for the most part, like as long as your questions are very positive and direct, right? So you can ask, it's completely acceptable to ask about pay. I know for a long time, people were like, never ask that question in an interview. Absolutely is acceptable to say, hey, what does the pay look like in this role, right? So a couple reasons we're going to go, or the next slide will go over a couple of those too, but let's say that you're interviewing for a position, there's nothing listed as what that pay would look like. And in your mind, you're like, hey, I need to make $40,000 a year. I need to make $70,000 a year, whatever that looks like, right? And they come back and they're like asking you to do, and this is a true story. I know I need to make I need to make a certain amount of dollars, right? And I was interviewing for a human resources position. And they came out and told me that my human resources, that the position that they were interviewing me for, and it was a higher human resources position, was going to pay $18 an hour. That is nowhere near where I need to be. So I need to know that up front, right? So they need to know my expectation and I need to know what they're looking at, right? So if I don't ask that question, they don't give me that answer. And then they decide to pick me as the person and I decline because I did not, that's not the pay I needed, right? Then they could have lost out on some really great talent somewhere else because I didn't ask a question, they didn't volunteer the information, and I'm not going to accept $18 an hour for the role, right? So asking about pay is acceptable. They may give you a range, right? So depending on experience, we may pay 50 to 65,000 for the role, right? So it just depends on your experience and things like that. But at least you'll have some kind of a mindset around it.
Perfect. Thank you for that advice. And I think a lot of them do or not realize that pay can be discussed. It is very taboo still. So thank you for that advice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to go on to the next slide just for time.
Yes. Okay. So following the interview, take some time after your interview, just kind of reflect. Maybe you're driving home. Maybe it's once you get home and you just kind of sit down and think about how that went, where everything was at, where things were left. And did you have any questions that were left unanswered? If you did, and it is important to have those answers, then reach back out to the recruiter or the person you interviewed with and ask for clarification or for some questions to be answered. Ask yourself, is this the right job for me? So reminding you again, you are interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. Is it the right fit for you? And then once you have an answer to those first two questions, right? So was everything answered? And if not, what was left unanswered? And then is it the right job for me? Then take a moment and send a follow-up email. That email can look one of two ways. One of them is, hey, I really thought about this job and I just don't think it's the right question. It's the right fit for me at this time. I want to thank you for your time that you put into your time and effort that you put into interviewing me. But I would be more interested in a role that entailed X, Y, and Z. If something like that comes up in the future, I hope that you keep me in mind. Good luck in your, in finding what you're looking for. And again, I appreciate you taking time out for me yesterday. And that can be the end of your email. If you think, hey, not only were all my questions answered, I feel like this job is exactly what I want it to be. I think I am the best fit for that job. Then the email could look something like this. Hey, I really want to thank you and let you know how much I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule for me, right? I understand that there's a lot that you have to do on a daily basis. And so giving me just a little bit of your day can mean a lot, right? I've thought about this role and I think that I would do wonderful in the role because blah, 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 right? Whatever those 3 items are, whatever those 5 items are, the reasons that you think you're the best fit for that job. I look forward to seeing or hearing from you soon with next steps. And leave it at that, right? So of course, sign it. But those emails are very important. They're going to say, hey, I appreciate your time. It's the right fit or it's not. And it re-solidifies to that interviewer, like, hey, this person is still interested or they're not. Because maybe, Tanya, you were the number 1 person on my list to hire for HR. And then it's not the right role for you, right? Like you interviewed well. I thought you'd be great for our team. But when you think about it, like you didn't want to be in doing benefits. You want to be a recruiter, right? So it's just not the right fit. I may not look at anybody else because Tanya, you and I had a connection in that interview. I felt like you were the person I wanted to go forward with. And so because of that, that's the person I'm picking, right? And you send an email, like you don't send any kind of email. I don't look at anybody else and I offer you the job and it's not the right fit. I've just discounted the other 4 people I may have interviewed because I was stuck on Tanya being the one. Or maybe Steve didn't interview as well, but he's very passionate about, people and their benefits and helping people in the human resources world, right? And so maybe I didn't look at Steven, even though he had a really good interview and he passed his interview, but because I was so focused over here, right? So by you saying, hey, I thought about it, it may not be the right fit for me, it gives me the ability to look elsewhere, right? But maybe Tanya, you're like, hey, this is the right fit. I'm the right girl. And you send me that email, and that just like catapults you to the top of my list, right? Because maybe Steve interviewed really well, you interviewed really well, and I'm just not sure which way I want to go. But yeah, you sent me this email and you re-solidified to me why you would be the best fit. And so then I go with you, right? So those emails can benefit you in multiple ways. Or maybe, Steve, you interviewed great. You told me, hey, this wasn't the right fit for me. But I really am interested in recruiting. And so I come back in 2 weeks, I have a recruiting position open up, or even 2 months. And I think, hey, Steve did a really good interview and that's really where he wanted to be. Let me find his email that he sent me and let me just reach back out to him, see if he's still looking for a job, right? So hopefully those answer, or that kind of helps you with like how to finish up the interview, after the interview, kind of where to go with that. Any questions about those items?
I do have one question in the chat. I know we're coming up on time, so this may be our last question before offering or allowing you to do the last slide. So the
Okay.
question is, what if an interviewer asks why you left a previous job? If so, what would be an appropriate answer?
Right. Okay. So this is where I tell people, I'm not telling you to lie. I'm telling you to just put a positive spin on it. Like maybe your boss was a total jerk. Maybe they were, and maybe you just hated working for that person, right? But instead of saying like, my boss was a jerk and I didn't want to work for him anymore, you could say something like, my views and priorities did not line up with the views and priorities of my previous company. And so I felt like it was better for me to take my my talent somewhere else, right? So it's a nice way of saying like, I just didn't agree, right? Or I left because I stopped believing in the company I was working for, right? So instead of saying I stopped believing in them, so you could say something like, there were some policy changes that didn't line up with my ethics. And so because of that, I felt like it was time for me to step back from the role I was currently in. So you can put a positive spin on a negative situation, is how I would tell you to do that.
That is great advice. Yeah, keeping it positive is the name of the game here. Just
Yeah.
making sure that is all positive. I'm
Yeah.
going to move to this last slide. If you want to touch on this, and then I'll do a wrap up slide just for sake of time.
Yeah. So this is the moment I do my shameless plug. So everything I do for Caterpillar, I do because I love the company I work for, and I believe in the company I work for. It would not be, I would not be doing anybody any justice if I did not tell you how amazing this company is. So if there's any questions, if anybody is interested in Caterpillar as a whole, we are a global company, have amazing benefits, locations throughout the United States and across the globe. If you are interested in any additional information from Caterpillar, there is a link that will take you to a form for you to fill out. That form is for me. It does not go to anybody else. It just comes to me for me to have the ability to touch base with you. answer any questions, give you any insight about the company that you might want or need. And then from then on, if you are interested in getting more information, I can send you to a recruiter. But it's an amazing company. I love what I do. And we are always looking for top talent. We do a lot with our Heroes Make America here in the Kansas area and abroad. So if there's anything I can do to help you guys with finding the right fit, I would be more than happy to do that.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time today, Vicki, to talk with our service members and our veterans, military spouses, our community that joined us today about this interview process. I think there's so many fears out there that you helped debunk today. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely.
I will also put in a plug. Caterpillar is a great company, so definitely take advantage of Vicki's time. Not every person says contact me. And when she says that, she means contact her. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask those questions. So definitely we dropped in the link to that QR code in the chat box. So I appreciate you taking the time, like I said today, Vicki. I will put another shameless plug for Heroes Make America and upcoming events. So remember that we do have some April events coming up. We'll drop those links into the chat box again. But thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about how to AC interview. Vicki, do you have any final last words before we sign off for today?
No, I wish all of you luck, and please do not hesitate to let me know if there's anything I can do to be of assistance. I will do about anything for our military community. So please let me know if there's anything I can do to help out.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Vicki. Thank you to all of our participants. That is a wrap. So this recording will go out. So if you have you want to review it, or if you have friends who would benefit from this recording, please pass it on. So you all have a great rest of your day. That's a wrap. Thank you all.
Thanks.